In this video I'm going to be showing you a load in Azure Data Factory. So loading in this case from Azure Blob storage into Azure SQL Database, which in itself isn't groundbreaking, but I think some of the functionality that exists in ADF is groundbreaking, particularly if you think about coming from an SSIS background as I have. So what I'm going to show you today is the load from blob storage to stage or to Azure SQL Database, and I think it's something that would be brilliant for a staging kind of load where really you're interested in just getting the data into staging as quickly as possible, and then you're going to transform your data from there. The mechanism that I'm talking about here works really well in Azure Data Factory because in ADF you don't have to worry about doing column mappings. So if you think about working in SSIS, where you have a source and a destination, and when you want to load that destination you have to do your mappings to say this column matches this column. In ADF you don't have to do that. So as long as you follow some simple rules, one being that your column names have to match, and they are case sensitive, so they have to match on case. And two, you cannot have more columns in your source than you do in your destination. If you follow those two simple rules, then you can just load from file to table or from any source to any destination and it will work. So you can have extra columns in your destination, that is fine, you just cannot have more columns in your source. So for me, this opens up something really exciting and something that we couldn't do in SSIS, which is to build a really simple but really generic load mechanism so that you're not defining, say, a package per staging table, or a data flow per staging table. It's all contained within the same pipeline in ADF. And the other massive benefit here in ADF is that you can load in parallel out of the box. So what I'll do is just show you the pipeline that I've created, and then I'm going to step you actually through how I've gone and created it. So here initially we are getting metadata. Basically we are going and saying find me all the files in blob storage, and then we're saying for each of those files do something. And in here, the massive thing about this for each, if you go to the settings, there's this little sequential tick box. Now, a for each in SSIS is sequential, so it will iterate over file by file. Here, in a for each in ADF, sequential isn't ticked by default, and that means that your for each is actually going to run in parallel unless you tick sequential, and there are obviously reasons to run sequentially. But in this case, where we're talking about loading a staging environment where all of the tables are, isolated, they're their own entity, they don't interrelate, we can just load them all in parallel and load it a hell of a lot quicker and a hell of a lot easier. So it's going to be parallel out of the box, which is fantastic. And then we just go into our for each, and then what I'm doing here is I've got a stored procedure that I call to say, okay, so for this source file, which table do I want it to load? And then I've got a copy command which goes and loads it to staging. Simple as that. And this mechanism is generic for basically whichever files I've got and whichever metadata I've got stored in my database to say this file matches to this table. So what I'll do next is I'll actually step you through the process of how I've created it. Okay, so what we're going to do is go and recreate this pipeline. So first thing I'll do is add a new pipeline, give that pipeline a name, I've done the G there, and then I'm just going to move it into my demo folder. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go and get metadata. And actually what we're going to go and get is files to load. And this is going to be us picking up data from Blob storage. So if we just jump over to my Blob storage account quickly, see I've got a customer, product and a sales CSV file. I'll just jump back a step, they're in my test data folder. So the plan is to just iterate over those, load them in. So go over to our data set, we are going to my Blob data set that I've already set up, Blob storage data set, and what we're interested in out of that data set is actually the child items. So this data set, if I jump over to it, is set up to be that test folder. So it's my Blob container, test data, and I haven't specified a file there. And here you specify your column delimiters, your quoted identifiers, or your text qualifiers, should I say, if you're using those, whether the first row is a header or anything like that, stuff that you'll be used to from SSIS if you're used to using that. So I'll jump back into here, so to my get files to load, and what I can do now is just quickly validate it. So far so good. And if I just debug it, what we will see, and what's really handy in Azure Data Factory, is what you see in the output. Now there isn't a massive, or from what I've seen so far, there isn't a massive amount of debugging information available. So this output is absolutely key, or the input and the output. So we just wait for this to run. So it's succeeded. So you can just go and have a look at the actions here. So this is the input, and it's all in JSON format. So it's what we're passing in. We've passed in that we're interested in the child items, tells us what we're reading, and then the output here. So here we get a sense of what kind of data we'll be working with is. So it's telling us the child items again in JSON format. So we've got our customer CSV, our product CSV, and our sales CSV. And really the challenge that I've had in ADF so far is just knowing how to use this information that's coming out. It's different to SSIS, as you would imagine, but it's consistent in that everything is JSON, and I've found it not too bad at all to work with. So what we're going to do now is do a for each. So basically we're saying for each of those files. So I'll drop a for each onto the pipeline, drag the connector over, the success connector. So as with SSIS, we've got on success, on completion and on failure connectors. So we're going to say here for each file, just naming the thing. And what I'm going to do here is, so I mentioned earlier about sequential, so we don't want this to be sequential, it's going to run in parallel. And then when we talk about the items, this is where we start to, I guess you start to need to know the syntax, but there's lots of information available there. So we're just going to say activity, oh my word, at activity, and the activity name is get files to load, and then we want the output of that, and this is where we start to work through those hierarchies in the JSON. So we want the output, and then we want the child items. And in fact, if I just, rather than just free typing it, if I scroll down to the bottom here, I've got activity outputs. So here, that's done a lot of the typing for me, and obviously getting stuff wrong or syntax errors, it's much easier to do like this, something I've only just realised recently. So what we're saying is for each of these, so each of these child items, go and do something. So I can't go and debug it now because the for each isn't actually doing anything yet. So what we do is jump into the foreach, and then I'll start to add some items in there. So the first thing I'm going to do is look up tables to load. So I'm going to put a lookup in place. Now I'm relatively new to ADF, so please bear with me. So I'm going to call it lookup table to load. Sorry, I need to click off that. So settings, so I'm going to look at my data source. Now I have a DemoDB static and a DemoDB dynamic, and I'll come back to those in a little while, but for the moment I'm going to use static. I've configured those myself, so they're not out of the box, so I've just created a static data set and a dynamic data set, and I will cover those in a short while. So actually here I'm interested in a stored procedure that I've created in my Azure SQL Database. Right, so basically what I've done is I've gone and created my tables. Like I mentioned, the columns are the same, the case is the same, and you can have more columns in your destination than your source, but you can't have more in your source than your destination. So what I've got is I've got a load definitions table that I've created. This is my metadata table, and then I'm inserting some data into my load definitions that says this is the source, this is the target schema, and this is the target table. And then I've just got a simple stored proc that's pulling in the source file name and basically saying for this source file, what's the schema that I'm loading and what's the table name that I'm loading. So that's what we're going to be calling now. So if we jump back to Azure Data Factory here, what we're going to do is finish our call here. So we've got stored procedure, so get table to load. If we go and import parameters, we see we want a source file name, and that source file name is going to be basically our item that we passed through. So this item is the item that we've passed into the for each loop, and you have to be quite careful with the syntax in some places. These curly braces are telling us that actually we want the string value of this item because the item is actually an array. So otherwise you'll get issues when you load it. It will fail to load. But there's some good documentation out there on how you reference variables and how you convert variables. So basically we're saying run this stored proc, pass this value into it, and we're only interested in the first row coming back. I mean, the stored proc is only returning one row, so we're happy with that. So now if I go and let me just validate before I debug, make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, good. So now if I go and debug, what I'm really interested in here is just seeing that for each is that stored procedure call is working. And really, once we're at this point, we're not that far away from loading data. And just while we wait, okay, so I was just going to say that all of the scripts for the database and all of the files I will put on the website for you to download if you want to play about with this. So as you can see here, we've got 3 lookup table to loads. That's good. So then we can look up the output of each. So this one is coming back with DBO and sales, DBO and product, DBO and customer. So far so good. So if I just hide my validation there, I'll jump back into the for each, and now the final step is to actually copy that data. So if I go to move and transform here, basically now we know what the file is, what the source file is, what the target schema is, and what the target table is. So we've got everything we need to do this copy. So what we're going to say is, I'm just going to change that to load staging. And what we are going to do is pick a source. So our source is our blob storage, and our wildcard file name is going to be our item that we passed in. So again here, so we're going to do exactly the same thing here as we did in the lookup. So we're going to say at item dot name. So basically this is telling us, go to blob storage, go and find that file, that's my source. And then in ADF, the destination is the sink, so they've decided to name it that way, but sink is your destination. So we're going to say here, rather than going to our static demo DB, we're going to go to our dynamic demo DB. And this dynamic demo DB I've set up with two properties, table name and schema name. So I'm going to pass those values in. So if I go and do the table name, what we're going to look for here this time is, it was the lookup tables to load we were interested in. So we've got our output and we want to say dot first row dot staging table name. And looking at your JSON output is going to help you with this. And again, this at the moment would return us an array. So actually, by sticking in curly braces, that's going to return us the string value of that. And then click OK, so that's our table name. I'm going to do the same with the schema name. So lookup tables to load output, first row, dot staging schema name. And again, just those curly braces. Okay, so that is basically us telling it to load to whichever table we've specified in the lookup. And again, source-wise, we're going with the item name, the blob file name. So if I just jump over to our dynamic data source, or data set, if you go and look at firstly, if I go over to the parameters here, see I've set up two parameters, table name and schema name. You can create your parameters with any name you like. But then what I'm doing is, I've got my linked service, so I'm telling it where to point to. And then, instead of specifying a table, specifying a table, I'm saying actually use these values that I'm passing in. So here I've got dataset.schema name, here dataset.table name, and dataset is just it referencing itself. So it's this dataset referencing itself. So it's basically saying get this parameter name. And here, if you have a look, if I just go and wipe this dynamic content out, I've got my two parameters here, click that, that's how I've got that. So I didn't need to know any syntax there, it's just going and referencing those parameters. So here, so rather than specifying anything hard-coded, we are passing in dynamic values, and those values are being passed in when we make the call here from the sink. So as soon as you go and reference this data set, it knows those properties, those parameters exist, and it asks you for the values of them. So hopefully now we are ready to run this and see if it loads. So I'll jump back into our database. If I just go and do a quick select top 1000 from the customer table, see if there's any data in there. There's not. So again, jump back to ADF, and if I go and debug this thing, fingers crossed, it's going to go and run, and it's going to load those tables in parallel out of the box without me specifying any column mappings. All I've specified is it's this file to this table. Let's see if it works. Oh, it succeeded. So if I just have a look at one of these, You can see I've read 1,000 rows and I've copied 1,000 rows in this one. And then here it just gives you a bit of detail on the performance of the load. So if I jump over, just have a quick look at the customer table there. Got some data. I'll go and have a look at product as well. Got some data there too. So for me, if I'm loading a staging environment where I've got any number of tables, you know, you might have 50 tables, you might have 100 tables to load, all you actually have to do is define that metadata now. So all I would do, if I go back to my system here, if I go back to the database here and just look at my load definitions, if I wanted to add more tables now, as long as I meet that criteria that the table matches the source file, I just add another row in and another row in and another row in, and then there's my tables added in there. Obviously there's more you can do with this, but this was hopefully just a reasonably quick fly through of some of this functionality that I've just learned, and hopefully it shows you just how powerful some of this ADF functionality is. So I hope this helps. Get out there and play with it. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time.